All right, we're live. Hey, what's going on, guys? Sithis here, and I am with my friend Anarchiosis. Sorry, did I say that
Beautiful.
incorrect?
You got it. First time. First try.
Anarchiosis, first try. Um, we've been chatting a little bit over the last few days, and he wanted to have a discussion with me about anarcho-capitalists because he is also a fellow anarcho-capitalist. Um, So yeah, man. This is Anarchosis, man. Introduce yourself, my man.
Okay. So I'm Anarchiosis, currently anonymous because if this doesn't work out, I have to return to the workforce. So we'll see
Hmm.
what happens. But yeah, basically I just do content about anarchy, capitalism, economics, and philosophy. What got me into this was philosophy. I studied philosophy in college, and it's been a few years since I studied it, and I decided to re-immerse myself back into it. And that made me want to go down the rabbit hole of capitalism and anarchy and more practical ethics. So that's how I ended up here.
Not bad, not bad. That's good. That's good. So you wanted to interview me and ask me some questions about some things, right? I'm assuming.
Yes, yes. So
Okay.
it's cool that we agree on most stuff. So we can get into more interesting things, I think.
Absolutely.
Okay. So first of all, what I wanted to discuss would start with argumentation ethics, and
Hmm.
I guess we can start with like a definition, and then you can explain to me argumentation ethics, and then I will give you my thoughts and possible challenges to you on argumentation ethics.
Yeah. Argumentation ethics essentially is. Now, I'll admit I'm not the biggest knower of knowledgeable person on argumentation ethics, because generally I don't use argumentation ethics to justify the non-aggression principle. Um, but the argument that a lot of people use with argumentation ethics is that essentially, if I'm not mistaken, it is that when you make an argument, you are choosing to not aggress over aggressing, whereas you're basically stating a preference through your actions, which is basically making an argument over committing an aggression. So when you make an argument, basically for making an argument, I should say you should make when you're making an argument, you're stating a preference that you prefer to not aggress over making an by then aggressing. So if you were to say, I guess later aggress, you would be going against your earlier claim that you made, which is that you prefer to not aggress over aggressing, which would make you, I guess, hypocritical in the eyes of many libertarian or contradictory in some under the eyes of some libertarians.
Very true.
Hmm.
Yep, that's and I learned about argumentation ethics first through Scott from Fabian Liberty. I'm sure. Do you know who he
Hmm.
is? And
Yeah, yeah, I've
then
met him.
oh, you've met him.
Yes.
Okay, cool. I'm still gonna talk with him. I'm gonna talk to him eventually. I'm excited for
He's a
that.
cool guy.
He
He's a
is.
very dad guy. He's a very daddish guy.
Yeah, he's a cool uncle.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah. But yeah, so I first learned about argumentation ethics through Scott, and I was like, "What the hell is he talking about?" And then
Hmm.
recently, I've been consuming Liquid Zulu content because I've run out of Scott content, and Liquid Zulu is how can I put this nice? He's very precise, and
Hmm.
he's very spot on with the things he says. But
Hmm.
hearing it from Liquid Zulu, who sounds like he has a better understanding of it than Scott, I've found some things that I find problematic with argumentation ethics,
Yeah.
specifically where I think it might just not be helpful in certain instances, and that's why I'm trying to learn more about it. But
Sure.
but yeah, so like let me tell you how I see argumentation ethics and then what I think the problem with it is.
Yeah.
So first of all, what I think it means is that when people argue, they're attempting to persuade each other through reason rather than coercion.
Yeah.
And by participating in argumentation, individuals are showing a mutual recognition of each other's autonomy and a need for a voluntary agreement because they're having a
Hmm.
conversation. And this mutual recognition is, and the choice of reason over force implies that there's a preference for non aggression over aggression because you're having a conversation.
Yeah.
Now, I think this can be helpful in spotting hypocrites. However, I don't think us as anarchists and libertarians have any trouble spotting hypocrites. I think we have plenty of tools of spotting hypocrites. Um,
Absolutely.
so what I think the problem of the potential problem of argumentation ethics is that maybe it's just the case that a lot of people are talking fraudulently, right? When we say that we're having conversations and debates, and Scott or Liquid Zulu goes over with argumentation ethics with people that they disagree with, what they're saying is that you can't be advocating for violence if they were acting in good faith. But why are we assuming that they're acting in good faith? I would say that a lot of people might just not be acting in good faith. And that's what argumentation ethics does. It essentially calls out people for being hypocrites. But
Yeah.
their followers have seen them do like hundreds, thousands of hypocritical things. And it's like, why is this one thing gonna, throw them off the train? I don't think it will. So argumentation ethics, I see, is just an additional tool to spotting hypocritical behavior, but I don't think it's very useful besides that. Do you have any
So
thoughts on that?
So if I could sum up what you're saying, you're basically saying that pointing out hypocrisy isn't really going to change many people's minds because most people are hypocritical in most ways, basically. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, pretty much. And also, like, people just won't even be able to follow. Like, 1% of people will be able to follow what argumentation ethics even is, and then see the hypocrisy from that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's the thing about when every individual has a we're the only people that don't have hypocritical ethics. As in, our ethics are, we believe in the non-aggression principle in every situation. Whereas everybody other than us, well, maybe not everybody other than us, but everybody has a hypocritical ethic to some degree. So just simply calling out, oh, well, you have a hypocritical ethic isn't going to really do much to people who are surrounded by other people who also have hypocritical ethics. Um, so the people who are watching it aren't really going to change their mind because they're hypocritical as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And, like, they don't see it. I mean, if
Absolutely.
it's ignorance or bad faith, people just don't see it. And so I think that, yes, argumentation ethics is like a really long way of saying they're a hypocrite, right? It's just a super long way of saying it. It's like a syllogistic form. And then most people aren't going to be persuaded by that. So even though we're right, which we are right, like if we could put
Absolutely.
out in a syllogism like all our arguments, we'd be right. The question is, how good are we at persuading potential, recruits for anarchism and libertarianism?
Yeah, that's the one thing that about anarcho-capitalism is that you sort of have to accept the logical, like our ideology is like a calculator, and every situation that we put into that calculator, that ideology will tell us what to do. So with the non-aggression principle, if somebody punches somebody, we automatically know that the aggressor is the one that's in the wrong. So that's basically our calculator. But the thing is, there are certain situations where people don't consider the aggressor to be incorrect. Um, and so because of that, that basically makes it very hard for some people to be like, oh, well, we to support the non-aggression principle, because a lot of people consider what we would consider to be aggressions to not be aggressions, even if they're not logically consistent in following it. So some people we may consider like stealing a piece of candy, even though you're starving on the street, to be considered aggression. But some other people would be like, oh, well, that's not an aggression because he's starving in the street. That person's better off by taking that thing from that other person. So a lot of people have their own way of justifying aggressions and because of that, they can never really accept the outcomes that come with supporting the non-aggression principle just because of their own like hypocritical principles.
Agreed. And I think one of the reasons it's so easy for people to justify aggression is because, number one, they don't know what aggression is.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, they don't even know what goodness is. They don't know what is good. I think most people just take certain things for granted, such as, like non-consensual things are always bad, right?
Hmm.
until they need to justify the things that they already believe in. So it's funny because you always go back to the sex example, the forceful sex,
Yes,
forceful
example.
propagation. And I
And yeah.
understand why you do that, because if you don't go to an example like that, they're just going to keep accepting aggression. So you have to jump to this example, because this is one of their core tenets in leftism, is that
Hmm.
attacking women in any way is like an ultimate sin. Attacking black people and attacking women, those are
Hmm.
ultimate sins. You cannot trespass on those things.
Absolutely. And it's kind of
So
like my
yeah.
conversation that I had with Warmish the other day, where every time that she would be like, or he, I should say, is technically he, every time that he would basically give me an argument, basically, she would be like, oh, well, might makes right. And then I would be like, oh, well, if might makes right, well, then obviously that means that if somebody has the might to rape somebody, well, then that means that they have the right to rape someone. No, but that's or more. That's immoral. That's unethical. Da, 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 da. I was like, yes, but your claim is specifically that might makes right. If might makes right, you're not saying that might if you have the might to take somebody over, therefore you have the ability to take them over. You're specifically saying that if somebody has the might to take somebody over, they have the right to take them over. That basically means that it's good to take them over. And so what I do in that situation is I think of a situation where I know they didn't completely disagree with that, to demonstrate to them that they don't actually really believe that. Because if they actually really believed where that might makes right, they would have no choice but to say, if there are two people on an island and one has the might to rape the other person, that automatically means that the person who has the might could rape the other person. Also, another argument that I make, like, towards like consequentialists, is that people be like, oh, well, if somebody is starving on the street and you know they need to steal a piece of candy in order to or see a piece of food or a piece of bread in order to keep going. The consequentialist would say, hey, I think that taking that piece of bread is better than stealing it, because allowing a person to live is a better outcome than a person dying and them committing an aggression. But the issue with the consequentialist argument, and here's my silver bullet for the consequentialist ethic, which is essentially, okay, well, if every single time there's a more, when you have two choices and you have to pick the choice that has more utility, or more, the best consequences, I should say, well, then I give them this hypothetical. Let's say that we are in a utopia, and in this utopia, everything is beautiful. There's no scarcity. There's an abundance of resources, no wars, no fighting. But the only way to keep this utopia alive is by doing a weird satanic ritual in a basement somewhere that perpetually rapes a child. And if somebody doesn't rape that child, then that utopia will collapse into nothingness. Are you morally obligated to rape that child? And if you are a true consequentialist, you would have no choice but to say yes. Somebody must be morally obligated to rape that child, because the two sides that you have is a utopia or a rape. What is better? What has more utility? Well, obviously, keeping the utopia is more utility than raping the child. So, if you are a consequentialist, you would have no choice but to say, yes, let's rape the child and keep the utopia going. But as a person who believes in the non-aggression principle, we would say, I don't give a shit about that utopia. If you're upholding a utopia, the only way to uphold your utopia is by initiating an aggression against another human being. Well, I'm sorry, then your utopia ought not exist. And that's sort of the difference between anarcho-capitalists and like consequentialists and liberals and people like that, is that there's no situation that you would give us where we would accept rape. There's no situation that you could give us where we would tell you it is okay to initiate an aggression against another person. Whereas with a consequentialist, if you were true in your consequentialist ethic, if you were to ask a consequentialist, is it wrong to rape somebody? Is it wrong to prostitute a child, or some horrific ideology? They would have no choice but to say, well, it depends on the situation. They can't say automatically no, because it really, to them, it matters on the situation.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And this actually leads perfectly into the next question I had for you, which is the idea of egoism versus moral realism. And
Hmm.
I think I might have some bad news for both you and I. Um, I believe that I've logically deduced that egoism is like inherently, definitionally true within all people. And then I believe I've also logically deduced that from that correlates determinism and also consequentialism are true by nature, and we cannot be anything other than that.
A consequentialist?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Explain.
All right. Let me pull up. Okay. So, first of all, when it comes to psychological egoism, it's essentially the idea, the descriptive claim that individuals naturally act to their own self interest and cannot do otherwise. And I actually came across this idea when I was studying praxeology, because I was getting deeper into Austrian economics, and I was going through praxeology, and I was like, okay, man acts. And basically, I came across this idea of like tautologies being true, definitionally true. And this connected me back to something I was studying earlier, where I was developing a theory of like self-interest before I even knew what egoism was. I like when I was younger, I was like, it seems to me that everybody does things in their own self-interest, and you can't do it otherwise. And it was only when I got older that I actually I found material that actually became what I know to be egoism today. And so I believe that I've logically deduced that there's an axiom where you are an egoist and you cannot escape being egoist. That doesn't mean we have to operate in a utilitarian framework in society. And it goes deeper than that. We'll get into that. But first, I'm just going to tell you about the logical axiom I think I've developed, which is the self does what the self wants. Okay? And basically, what I'm saying here is an axiomatic and logically undeniable truth within how we understand human behavior. If we understand praxeology, we know that, and as we know, as we've seen autistically Zulu say, you cannot do that which is not your preference. You must always follow through with your preferences, right? It makes perfect sense. And the reason why you can only do what you prefer is because you can only do what you prefer. It's tautological, right? And this is because of you. So essentially the statement is saying that it's a foundational principle for understanding human behavior. If we try to refute this, it involves the concept of individuals acting according to their preferences, which reinforces the statements. You will always do what is in your self-interest. And I don't think this is a bad thing. I think this is actually what Ayn Rand was getting at when she was telling us about rational self-interest and egoism. I think she was telling us that, well, she went a step further and said that we ought to act in our self-interest. But from what I can tell, it seems that everybody is an egoist and cannot not be an egoist.
Okay. Yeah, I certainly agree that us human beings, we act in our self-interest. And just one thing I want to add to that adds on to your point, which is that even when you're doing something altruistic, you're doing it because you're doing it to not because you're getting some sort of financial profit, but you're making what they call a psychic profit. So like, let's say like I see a kid on the street and they see them hungry. Some people might consider me giving them a piece of food to be altruistic, but I wouldn't have done that unless I saw my situation, unless I felt like I would be better off by doing that than not doing that. So in the end of the day, even if you're doing something altruistically on the outset, it may seem altruistic on the outset, you're making a psychic profit from doing those things. So therefore, in the end of the day, it isn't really altruistic. You're doing something, even though you may be helping another person, you're doing it in your own personal self-interest. That makes sense.
Yes, exactly. I'm glad you agree with me, bro. I'm glad you agree.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Okay, nice. So we're on the same page.
Yep.
Okay. And I mean, I don't know if you want me to prove it, but like consequentialism and determinism are corollary to this axiom, because the idea is for determinism, obviously it's very simple. You can't do what you don't prefer. So you are determined to do what you prefer always.
Determinism, but does determinism explain that it doesn't mean that you're automatically determined to do something despite your own actions or something like that?
So yeah, so determinism and free will has been like a long debate in the philosophy community for as long as philosophy's existed, and the idea has always been that either humans have free will or humans are fated to do what is what has been mathematically programmed into them by the atoms of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of determinism is that if you can account for every single variable in the entire universe, then you can correctly map out everything and know exactly what will happen because you can mathematically deduce everything that will happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm personally a proponent of that because I am like a physicalist. I believe that the world is physical and math is in nature, and that's how we understand math, is by seeing it. We see things in nature, and that's what we call math. And so if you can take account of all these variables, you can map out everything, and that just leads into determinism, where everything is fated to be because cause and effect, because of the law of causality. Does that make sense?
I'll admit I'm having a little bit of a hard time.
Okay. It's no yeah. And that's because we're kind of getting deeper into like the philosophy part of it, not like grounded in the physical world. But
I'll admit this to you, right? I'm kind of a new to the anarcho-capitalist realm, and I feel like I have a pretty good understanding. But when it comes to the deep, super deep philosophical stuff, I'm kind of scratching the surface on it. So, whatever you tell me now, I may not have a great response to it. You know what I mean?
That's totally cool, bro.
Yeah,
that's totally cool because I wouldn't say specialize, but I have studied more philosophy than I have anarchism, and I'm sort of new to anarchism. I've only been researching about anarchism for like the past 2-ish years. Like I've been watching content creators and like learning and researching about anarchism, but like beyond that, I've been studying philosophy. So I'm new to anarchism also. I'm just finding it's interesting because I'm finding how philosophy and anarchism really interact, and this is one of those things that I found out. But determinism, it really doesn't matter in the end because even though determinism exists, we still have choice. We have the thing that we call choice. So if anybody tries to make an argument of determinism against you, just always know that there's a thing that's called choice that we don't fully understand that is within determinism. And that's still the question of, like, is that free will or not? Mm-hmm. And it's like, we do have choice. The question is, do we have free will? Whatever. But so that's determinism. And then the consequentialism one is very easy too. Essentially, it just means that if you're taking the logical axiom, the self does what the self wants. You essentially come down to I've got a small syllogism, but it's essentially just the self always acts to achieve what it values most at the moment. And then what the self values most are the outcomes or consequences of actions, meaning what you value is the consequence of your action, because as per the preference that you have. And then an action is chosen because its expected outcome aligns with what the self values most. And then finally, individuals are inherently consequentialists because they act based on the outcomes that they value. So that's a long-winded way of saying that in the same way I said that the self does what the self wants, individuals will do the things that they prefer. And that's the consequences. The consequences are the things that you prefer.
Okay, but the thing is, you don't always know the consequences of every action before you take it, right? Wouldn't someone say that?
No, but you have something that's motivating you to take an action. As praxeology says, man acts purposefully. The reason man acts is because they have things that they value. And so I would say that consequentialism leads in here because you are going after the thing that you value, and you will do whatever means that is required to do the thing that you value, no matter what. So, for example, for libertarians, this would be that the thing that libertarians value is freedom, and their means of achieving freedom is the NAP. Okay. And so we can still be consequentialists. But now what we're doing is we're using consequentialism, and we're using the NAP as a vehicle to achieve our means of maximizing freedom in the world. And that's why I don't think it's bad to be a consequentialist. I think it's bad to be a utilitarian, because a
I see.
utilitarian is a subcategory of consequentialism where you attempt to achieve, maximize pleasure and minimize pain. But consequentialism just means maximizing the thing that you value. I think that the problem is most people value pleasure and pain, and what we should be valuing is freedom.
So if I could reiterate what you said, your issue is not with consequentialism because consequentialism is just choosing the outcome that you feel is the best. What your issue is with utilitarianism, which is choosing the outcome that we believe has the best utility.
Yep, that's correct.
And and because we believe in the non-aggression principle, we're always going to choose the action that conforms with the non-aggression principle because we believe the consequences of not following that non-aggression principle is worse than following it. Is that what you're trying to say?
That's exactly right. And this gets deeper into things like the purpose of life. I won't get too deep into this because it's very complicated, but I've been
Okay, can I say
taking.
something real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
Um, so it seems to me that my argument that I made before is not really an argument against consequentialism itself, but more utilitarianism. Is
Correct.
that what you're trying to say? So the
Correct.
whole so the whole like utopia child situation, you could be a consequentialist and still accept the non-aggression principle, but only a utilitarian would have no choice but to say the child must be raped. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. Yeah, yeah, that makes sense when you explain it in that way. Okay,
Yeah,
go ahead.
yeah, and I think this is the big discrepancy, the big difference right here. I think that
Mhm.
libertarians are looking at life as something far deeper than other people are. People are looking at it very surface level. People
Mhm.
look at life as like pleasure and pain. It's like the entire point of life is to have the most amount of pleasure and have the least amount of pain. There, you want to be rich, you want to go on vacations, you want to travel around the world, you want to do things that you enjoy.
Mhm.
And this is pleasure and pain. But I think the libertarians get deeper into the idea of life might not necessarily be about that. I've been developing this theory where I've been trying to prove that freedom is the point of life. And the reason I feel so strongly about this, and I'm sickened to the stomach that I can't create a logical truth for this, is
Mhm.
that throughout human history, there's something that people have always strived to achieve, and that is freedom. There's been revolutions fought, wars fought, all for this thing that we call freedom. And we can't exactly pin down why that is. Why do we fight the Civil War? Why do we have the French Revolution? Why do we have the United States Revolution? It's because people want this thing that we call freedom. And I believe intuitionally, which I hate saying because I hate intuition, but I believe
Yeah.
intuitionally that freedom is more valuable than life. And that's because
Yeah.
a life worth living is a life that is free. And that's why people will die for freedom.
Yeah. Yeah, because living a slave life is for some people would be worse than death.
Yes. But
Mhm.
some people are okay with living as a slave as
Yeah.
long as they're safe. I think it was Michael Malice who said this. He said something to the effect that um, people would be okay being people would rather be safe than free. I think he said something like that.
People would trade their freedom for
Freedom
security.
for security, yes. And this is because people let their base instincts rule them. They allow themselves to be, ruled by their whims and their desires, and their whims and desires and instincts, which are all good things on a surface level, try to keep them alive. But the problem
Mhm.
is if you let that rule you, then you can end up becoming enslaved to those things. And that's not the point of life. The point of life is something deeper, I believe. But yeah, any thoughts on that before we move on?
My only thing about that is, if people choose to be a slave over being freedom, I would argue that people prefer life over freedom in many situations. Because the first thing that a lot of people value is life, and then if they don't have that, well, then they can't have freedom. if that makes sense.
It does.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, that's all I gotta say about that.
okay, that's true. And it has made me think deeply about it. Like, why are people okay with being, secured but without freedom? And
Well, because I would theorize that the reason why is because um you could be free on a desert island, right? And but you won't have any food, you won't have anything, but you're gonna just straight up die without substance or something that's gonna keep you alive. So your life, staying alive, becomes the first thing that you worry about. And then then once people are able to keep themselves alive and they're able to secure themselves, freedom sort of becomes the next thing because you can't be free unless you're alive. And that's why people will do things to other people that would go against their own ethic because they're like, oh, I'm willing to risk another person's freedom if it means keeping myself alive, you know? And that's sort of like the selfish nature that individuals have. Um, yeah.
yeah,
So
that's absolutely right. I
that's
mean,
why I think
basically,
capitalism, sorry, I was just going to say, that's why I think capitalism is the best system because it creates such an abundance that we don't need to worry about like having to fight each other for food and bare subsistence, that we have everything in abundance, and then we could focus on things that are actually um, more important than just simply staying alive, such as being free.
exactly. Yep.
Hmm.
I always thought that we should supercharge the economy, get rid of all social programs. And, like, if we just did this for God knows how long, it wouldn't even be that long. Like,
Yeah,
40, 50 years. If we supercharged the American economy, we could achieve nuclear fusion energy. We could achieve
absolutely.
AI. We could literally get rid of all base level entry level jobs, and
Hmm.
we wealth would be so abundant that people that are entry level would only have to work extremely minimal amounts of time, 5 hours a
Absolutely.
week. Like, you could work
Hmm.
5 hours a week possibly, and you could live off of that because the economy would be so supercharged with wealth. We would have so much technology and money that we wouldn't need to work. We'd have so much deflation that you could work a 5 hour job and live a fantastic life.
Yeah,
Um,
and opposed to a lot of the Chicagoans, the Chicago school guys, that
Freaking Chicagoans.
deflation, those guys, they say that in deflation is not good, whereas I say deflation is very good. Um, and if we only had a sound money that was increasing in value over time, people wouldn't need to be taking out loans. People would no longer need to put their money into all of these ridiculous different stocks and bonds and complicated ways to try to keep their wealth, retain their wealth. The state would no longer steal our money because that's the main reason why we have inflation is because the state prints out a shit ton of money, deflates our currency, and then uses that as to buy what they want. And if we got rid of intellectual property rights, all of these fucking regulations, welfare programs, Medicaid, Medicare, all of that shit, and all the regulations when it comes to AI, cloning, CRISPR, and all of these other technological advances, because all of these other countries are going to do it without regulations, are going to get it ahead of us, and then they're going to beat us. And nuclear energy, and we, like you said earlier, we would have such an abundance. We only need to work 5 hours a week, but all of our wealth is being stolen through all of these regulations and inflation and state government fucking laws.
Yep, and used in unsustainable ways. We're essentially just burning money. We're just
Yeah,
burning money into the air.
yeah.
They call you King Sithis, but they should call you the king of leading me into my next points because you're so good at it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
I love it.
So it's interesting because so the next topic is the idea of principled versus unprincipled libertarianism, where
Mhm.
I would call myself, since we both know now that I'm a consequentialist, we can move forward with personally. I don't think that anarchists and libertarians should try to um, maintain control over the state or try to I don't think that we should be attempting to vote in an anarchist or libertarian president, because I think it's a fairy tale. I think it's a dream. I think it's impossible.
Yeah,
I think it's
I
impossible.
agree.
And my next point,
Yeah.
you're not going to agree.
Oh, okay, go ahead then.
Okay, so what I think we should do is join forces with people who just have interest in capitalism. I think that we should try to maximize capitalism and minimize any type of socialism, by any means necessary. And that means if we have to vote for conservative presidents, I say we should have to do that. And the reason
Absolutely.
why. Oh, okay, interesting. Because I see lots of libertarians. It's just funny because I'm assuming you watched the Trump talking in the libertarian. Yeah, that was hilarious, dude. That was
Yeah,
freaking
he got
hilarious.
booed like you would not
Yeah,
believe. Holy cow.
which
But
he
the thing is,
deserved it.
there's a lot of, I'll say this about Donald Trump, right? I don't I don't like Donald Trump as in, like, I don't like all the things that he does. But in comparison to Joe Biden and in comparison to the libertarian candidate isn't going to win. The last year they got 1%, not even 1% of the vote. So to me, it's just like Donald Trump is clearly the better option between him and Joe Biden. But that's not me saying that I think that Donald Trump is is the greatest option for a libertarian. I think that he does a lot of things that go against libertarianism, such as his tariffs and a whole bunch of other things that he's done. But yeah, but again, I don't think there's anything wrong with the libertarian voting for Donald Trump because he's the lesser of two evils. It's kind of like Liquid Zulu makes actually an excellent point where he says there's nothing wrong necessarily with voting, and the reason why there's nothing wrong with voting is because let's say that you're in a really fucked up situation where somebody comes into your house and they say, "Hey, I'm going to shoot your brother or your sister. You got to choose one." You know, obviously in that situation, it's not your fault that the person who gets shot gets shot. They're giving you there's a hostage situation, which is the government. They're forcing us into a situation, and you have either a choice not to choose, whereas somebody is going to get shot, or to pick somebody. And so there's nothing wrong with making that choice, you know, because you're there. It's not the person, you're not the one committing the aggression. It's the state that's committing the aggression. It's the state that's making the choice essentially to do that thing. It's just putting you in a situation where you have no choice but to make a choice. So if that makes sense, does that make any sense?
It
So
does. It does. They're
yeah,
making us. They're forcing us to become consequentialists.
yes, in
They're
that
forcing us
situation.
because we don't have. Because if we don't pick either of those things, we're going to lose everything.
Absolutely.
And so
So
this is why, yeah, this is why I would consider like a pragmatic libertarian approach, and it's because that I don't think we are ever going to take control of the White House. I think that we will win in the future, but it won't be through politics. It's going to be through technology. That's how we're going to win.
yeah, I think what we should do personally, I think we should just try to push for more libertarian leaning right Republicans. The Republicans aren't that far off from libertarians in terms of our ideology. They're very free market. They're very freedom oriented. So if we could just get more libertarians to try to get into the Republican Party, and maybe, you know how they have like the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, and then they have the normal wing, and then they have this wing and that wing. Uh, we should have that with the Republican Party. There should be a group of libertarians who are in the Republican Party that fight for what libertarians actually believe in. And I feel like that's the best way of actually going through things. I do I don't think that the people who are pushing for the Libertarian Party are necessarily wasting their time. I think that what they're doing is good and they mean well. But just me personally, I just don't really see the it working personally. Like I just don't. Like at least now, anytime soon. So I feel like we kind of have no choice but to sort of work with what we got. Uh, if that makes any sense.
It does make sense, and uh, I mean, it's just what it is. It's like we're not going to win the state. It's never going to happen. We're such a small group of people, and what we need to do is keep we need to keep the nation from collapsing. Essentially, is what we need to do. What I want to do is hang on to life support as long as we can, while we're creating competition to America. That's what we have to do.
Mm-hmm.
These are the three biggest things that I think are going to challenge the state. Number one, the internet, freedom of information, the decentralization of decentralization of information. This is the first big step that has caused a chain of reactions that is going to lead to the state's downfall, all states. The decentralization of information. That was the biggest and most important win of, like, I don't know, the entirety of existence. That's how we're going to beat states, is decentralized information. Mm-hmm. Number two, decentralized money. Bitcoin, I don't know what you know about Bitcoin, but Bitcoin is going to be a decentralized money that cannot be controlled by the state. Like, they might try to take it from us, and there will be a civil war if that happens. But this is the next step. When we decentralize money, we're now taking back that which was stolen from us for probably since as long as the state has existed, since the Roman Empire. We're
Abolish
finally
the Fed.
Abolish the Fed, exactly.
Yeah.
We're giving back people just the base level of keeping the value that they created. We're giving that back to people. That's what Bitcoin does. Number three is going to be AI. Decentralizing AI is going to speed up everything else. It's going to speed up technology development. It's going to make people get smarter. It's made me get smarter. I'm sure it's made plenty of people get smarter. But AI is going to supercharge the economy. It's going to supercharge intelligence. People are going to get smarter. And when people get smarter, they're going to understand these principles better. And so I think those are the big three hopes for the futures. We've got the internet, Bitcoin, and AI. I think these things, and whatever comes next. We also have free private cities that are coming into task, and those are going to start challenging living inside the state. So what we need to do is keep as little destruction from happening. Let's just try to hold off a war for as long as possible, develop technology to the point where we can create competition with the state. That's how we win. It's not through politics, it's through innovation.
Yeah, kind of like I 100%, 200% agree with you on all of that.
Fuck yeah.
AI, Bitcoin, the internet, those are the things that are going to liberate us. Those are the things that are going to bring us freedom, because it has created a connection with all human beings where now stopping people, whenever a government does something that's really fucked up, we can bring it to the light in a much easier way than we used to. So back in the old days, police used to beat the shit out of people, and because there was no video cameras, people couldn't record it and show it and put it on the internet, and there wasn't as much outrage. But now, whenever the government beats the shit out of somebody, or the police beat the shit out of somebody, and someone records it and puts it on the internet, there's now a huge outroar. People are actually being exposed because of the internet to a lot of the fucked up things that the government does on a daily basis. And I think that's sort of awakening a lot of people to what is really going on. And another thing that I didn't mention earlier is the one thing that I think us libertarians need to do is we need to stand on business. We need to stand on our principles, and which means that we cannot be apologetic about our ideology, in the sense that a lot of libertarians, they'll be like, oh, well, actually, maybe we do need driver's licenses. Actually, maybe we do need, regulations on guns. Maybe we do need to, legalize, not legalize meth. The issue with all of these people is they're not fully holding on to their principles. As a libertarian, we need to go around and be like, of course I support legalizing drugs. Of course I believe in legalizing prostitution. Of course I believe in freedom. Of course I believe in abolishing the Fed. Of course I believe in all of these things. And we need to be more unapologetic with our ideology. And I feel like that is going to get us a lot more respect in the political sphere, because a lot of these progressive people aren't being apologetic about their ideology. They're being very forspoken about all the fucked up things that they want. You'll have people on Twitter just saying, yes, we need to tax the rich. Yes, we need to eat the millionaires. Yes, we need to take away guns from people. They're not apologetic about that. They're cheering themselves on when they say that thing. Whereas I feel like with a lot of libertarian people who run for office, they're very apologetic about their own ideology, and I think that's what absolutely holds us back.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think we need the pendulum to swing back. I think we need to start taking charge, taking responsibility. I think it's happening because we have very powerful right wing icons that are starting to come to the surface. First, we had Jordan Peterson. I think that was probably the first domino to fall. Jordan Peterson has been like, he's a meme at this point. He's an icon. He's a world icon because of like the things that he says. Clean your room. Everybody does the frog voice. But he's become an icon for telling men to do what's right, do their duty, find purpose, and then that's sort of created this entire idea of now we're going into like subcategories, sub-factions. We've got the red pill rising up. We've got all kinds of different establishments popping up of young men trying to take back their lives, which has been stolen from them, from the state, which has been trying to repress our our manhood for us for so long. And so that's another thing that's, I think the pendulum's going to swing back. I hope that it's not right-wing authoritarianism as certain people might want. For example, Andrew Wilson. But yeah, I mean,
yeah. But you know what? That's why I think like, I hate to bring this guy up, but like Andrew Tate got so popular because even though what he was saying was a little bit outrageous, yes, women are property, yes, I should be allowed to do this to it. He was unapologetic with his ideology. He went on straight national TV and was just like, yes, this is what I believe. This is what I believe. And you know what? You're not going to change me. And this is how it is. And that's, I think, that's what got people to sort of gravitate to him. This unapologetic ideology. Like,
that, and they're fucking hilarious.
And he's fucking hilarious with his memes and shit. But yeah, he didn't stray away from his opinion. He was very like what he felt, he said, and he didn't try to censor it for anyone. And that's how we should be, us libertarians. We shouldn't be apologetic about our ideology. Like the other day, I got into a debate about somebody, and they're talking about environmentalism, and I was like, "Listen, man, I love to destroy the environment. I hate the environment. The environment should be destroyed." And everybody's looking at me like, "Whoa, whoa!" And they had nothing basically to say to that because they've never heard somebody be honest about their ideology. And at the end of the day, everybody believes that they should destroy the environment to some degree. I'm the only one that's honest about it. I'm the only one that's unapologetic about it. So they have nothing basically to really say.
Agreed. And we won't linger on this too much longer, but I think it's wholly ironic that the people will always blame the big companies and the rich people when the people who are destroying the environment are them, the consumers. Because when you... in China. Because
but that's a government. That's the state.
It is a government.
Yeah.
But the thing is, when you hire a killer to kill somebody, it's not the killer's fault entirely. It's your fault for hiring the killer. The consumers, which will not change in a socialist or communist state, will still want products. They will vote with their money. It's going to be a horribly inefficient system, but they will still choose the same things. They'll say, wait a minute, you didn't say anything about no electricity. I want electricity. Wait, we have to like go to a well like 100 feet from our house? Like we don't get plumbing? Like they won't vote for that. They will vote for destroying the environment because quote unquote, destroy the environment. Mm-hmm. Because when we quote unquote destroy the environment, that is what is, making life convenient and easy, and it gives us all the technological commodities and things that we enjoy nowadays. And
Absolutely.
It's just hilarious because they don't see that. They think it's the companies. No, it's the consumer.
In the end of the day, these companies are only making these things so that you can purchase them. They wouldn't be destroying the environment if you didn't want the products in which they were purchasing. That's the whole reason why a business is started. Businesses don't just pop out of nowhere, produce things, and then, for no reason. They get paid by people who want that service. So it ultimately, we are all to some degree culpable for the amount of environmental damages that is happening. But that's the thing about libertarians is we don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. We don't think that destroying the environment is necessarily a bad thing because we're not hypocritical about it because every person to some degree believes that destroying the environment is a good thing. If you believe in producing anything, whether it be food, gadgets, toys, uh, anything, you're destroying the environment to some extent. So yeah, that's really what it's all about. Like they're not really fully. Like I said, they're hypocritical.
And if they just committed to literally like 20 years of pure capitalism, we would literally achieve nuclear fusion, meaning we would never mine again, we would never frack again, we would never need coal or oil. We would create 100% clean, renewable energy from fusion reactors, and
And
it
yeah,
would be utopian. We would have unlimited clean energy. So it's ridiculous. If we just supercharge technology and research, we could do this. But you got to hold us back, and it's
the
tough. But
problem is the state basically gives companies a certain amount of waste in which they're allowed to put into the air, and they allow them to do that. They don't make them pay for the waste in which they are destroying. So, in a libertarian society, if you're destroying the air, you would have to pay the people whose air you are destroying. If not, you wouldn't be allowed to destroy that air or pollute that air. So, when you are paying for the pollution in which you are creating, that creates an incentive for private companies to make sure that they minimize that cost as much as they can. But the issue is most companies aren't paying for the pollution that they're using. So because of that, they don't really have to worry about the consequences that come with it. They don't have an incentive to be the most cleanest that they can be. That's why a bunch of people believe, oh well, we need have no choice but to put this regulation, that regulation, this regulation. But it isn't regulation. What we should do is make them pay for the pollution that they make. And if you make them pay for the pollution that they make, they will do what they can to reduce the pollution that they make, because companies are at war with waste. Waste is a terrible thing for private companies because waste makes them lose profit, and pollution is waste. So when you make it expensive for them to create waste, they will do everything they can to turn that waste into something profitable. And over time, you will see more and more environmentally clean ways of creating goods and services because they have to pay for the pollution that they create. That's how it would work in a libertarian and an ANCAP. But that's not how it works with right now. The state would be like, here's a permit, you could pollute this much. Here's a permit, you could pollute this much. You're only allowed to permit this arbitrary amount of pollution into the air. And it's never going to work to stop the issues that these people actually have.
dude, I'm telling you, if people just understood that people respond to their incentives, that
Hmm.
would solve so many issues. But people fundamentally don't understand that. They don't understand supply and demand. They don't understand that people respond to incentives. If we pay you double to create corn, you're going to make a shit ton of corn, okay? And then nobody's going to buy it. That's
Yeah,
just the reality of the situation. If people actually knew praxeology, this would reduce so many of our problems. Um,
absolutely.
but so moving on to the next topic, which is Dave Smith versus Andrew Wilson. Did you
Okay.
watch that debate? Do you know anything about that?
I did not, and I'm
It was
not
a
very
shit show.
familiar. I have not really familiar with Dave Smith that much. I know that he's like a comedian libertarian, but yeah, I'm not very familiar with him. I'll be honest.
Okay. It's actually funny.
Maybe I'll check it out.
The two guys that got me into anarchism are Michael Malice, first of all, and then Michael Malice got me to Dave Smith, and those were my entry points into libertarianism. But it's just so funny because Dave Smith is a really, really smart guy. Like he's a smart guy empirically. Like he knows history and he knows like Austrian economics and he knows historian. He's got a lot of knowledge. But the
Yeah,
thing is, in the debate with him versus Andrew Wilson basically kept attacking him, asking him, "What is the NAP founded on?" And the thing is, Dave Smith didn't know the answer to that. And
founded on.
this is a really, really, really tough question because the question of what the NAP is founded on is a fundamental question that many people don't understand. And it's like, it goes like this. It's like, why do you believe in the NAP? Like, just tell me your answer. Why do you believe in the NAP?
The reason why I believe in the NAP was because it's it's contradictory to use your body and say that it's okay for me to use my body, but it's also not okay for you to use your body. So to respect other people's, you have no choice but to respect other people. To not run into the contradiction in your ethic, you have no choice but to respect other people's bodily rights if you want yours to be respected.
Okay, interesting. So
Mm-hmm.
the thing about ethics, and I know you're not, I know you don't do all the research into the ethics and everything,
Mm-hmm.
but as of now, and I'm sure many people will disagree with me, but
Mm-hmm.
as of now, moral realism, or the idea that morality exists, is very dicey. There's not actually any evidence that morality exists, and I think that's the really hard issue of the NAP, because the NAP is assumed to be founded on what morality should be. If morality exists, it must be founded on the NAP must be founded on it, or the NAP completely supports morality, because what is morality if not like consent? But the thing
Mm-hmm.
is, currently there is no evidence that morality exists, meaning good and evil, good and bad don't technically exist because we can't prove that they exist.
Well, um, if you have two options, right, and one of them falls out of contradiction into contradiction, its negation must be true.
But so here's the problem. I'm sure you've heard of the Izot problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I've watched a lot of Liquid Zulu content, and I still have trouble following what he says, because I listen very carefully when he gets to the Izot problem and essentially says that there's a contradictory ethic. Now, I understand contradictory ethics, but ethics presupposes that morality exists. Now, I agree with him on law. I agree with him with the legal system, because the legal system is something that we create that must be objectively true. It must have no inconsistencies. And that's where I think it works. But as far as morality goes, well, we haven't proven morality exists.
Well, the reason why the non-aggression principle is true because its negation contradicts itself. The non-aggression principle is the only principle that doesn't contradict itself. So there's three forms of law. There is, and I'm going to summarize this because this is kind of what Lake Zulu goes into in one of his courses. So basically, there's not mixed law. There's law of the jungle, which is might makes right. There's mixed law. So that means some people ought to aggress sometimes, which is mixed law. Well, law of the jungle is some people should aggress. Mixed law is sometimes people should aggress. And then there's the non-aggression principle, which is nobody should aggress. The first one is incorrect because it doesn't distinguish between ownership and possession. The issue is that the second that you are using your body, you're basically saying, I ought to have the right to use my body. Um, so therefore, you're claiming ownership over your body. But if another person tries to wrestle that thing from you, well, then you're basically saying that they're the owner because they have the might to take it. So there is no, so basically, whoever is the possessor of something is automatically the owner. You're not distinguishing between ownership and possession. And then, so that's kind of contradictory because and the reason why that is because you have to distinguish between ownership, the person who has the right to use that scarce resource, and the person who possesses it. Because then you don't have any ethic at all. Basically, any person could just go up to anyone, murder anyone, and kill anyone. So that's off the table. So the second one is what you call mixed law, which is essentially um, some people have, or sometimes it's okay to aggress. The issue with that is that you're not, in order to have a ethic, it must be universalizable. Because if not, then it's contradictory. Because the reason why is because every single person who has the capacity to reason is able to be held responsible for the actions in which they commit. They're able to choose the actions in which they commit. So because of that, um, to say that one person is allowed to aggress while the other person isn't allowed to aggress, you're basically saying this person has the capacity for reason, but this person does not have the capacity to reason, so therefore he has the right to aggress on that person. Or you're saying that you have two different sets of law, one that applies to this person, but it doesn't apply to this person. But you can't have two different sets of laws for two people that are capable of reasoning. You have to have one unifiable ethic. because that's contradictory. So to say that one person's able to aggress against another, whereas this person's not supposed to aggress, again, that's contradictory because you have two different ethics for two different people who are capable of reasoning. So that's a contradiction. So then there's the non-aggression principle, which just means that no one has the right to aggress. It's universalizable, and it doesn't have any contradictions. You can distinguish it ownership for possession, and it's a unified law that applies to every single person that's able to raise it. So because the other two run into contradiction, its negation must be true. That's the only option that's left.
I agree with you on the legal standpoint. I just
Mm-hmm.
want to say that first. But let me ask you a
Mm-hmm.
question.
Mm-hmm.
Is it wrong to murder?
Yes,
Why?
because um, the second that you murder somebody, you basically have demonstrated that you believe that it is okay to murder somebody. So at the second that you murder somebody, you would be stopped from arguing that another person is okay to murder you, because you've already demonstrated through your actions that you believe that murder is an acceptable action. So um, that's the main reason why it's wrong, because the second that you try to go against the consequences, you would be contradicting yourself.
Okay, but consequences aside, and I think this is my problem with most of Zulu's stuff is he says things are wrong, but um, right and wrong imply a moral. If he's talking legally, I agree with him. But if he's talking morally, I
Oh,
can't
okay, I get
I
what you're
can't agree
saying.
with him. Yeah, so if we
Okay,
say from a non-legal standpoint is murder wrong, you would have to say yes, murder is wrong. And then I would ask you why, and then you would say something, but you would essentially have to be proving the intrinsic value of life. And proving the intrinsic value of life sort of wraps back around to moral properties. But go ahead.
yeah, you're right. Maybe instead of saying wrong, what I should have said was illegal. See, I guess you're right when you say that wrong is more of like a subjective standard. It's more of just like, oh, I think that's wrong. I think that's right. Whereas law isn't speaking about wrong or right. It's more just about what is legal or illegal, what should be uh, stopped and not stopped, if that makes sense.
Yes, and this I'll tell you this funny truth that actually blackpilled me a couple days ago, which is that I was arguing with First Amender. I know you like that guy,
Oh my
and
God.
so I was having a discussion with him, and afterwards I just realized that at the end of the day, all arguments essentially boil down to I want this to happen. Or no, you're wrong. And then the other person says, no, you're wrong. And then you say, no, you're wrong. And the reason why this is so funny and blackpilling
Hmm.
is because essentially what we're doing is we're all arguing from preferences.
Yeah.
And that really disgusts me as someone who values logic above all, because I want to create logically valid answers. And that's why the is-ought gap disgusts me as well, because we have not created a genuine deductive case for why someone ought to do anything. We don't know. It's just because we would have to understand like what the purpose of life is. We would have to know that in order to know what morality is. And that's probably one of the hardest questions of existence. And so it blackpilled me a lot because it's really just my preferences versus your preferences. And I hate that because I want to be right. I want to make a case that's right. And the only thing I can really argue is that in a society of libertarianism, what we will have is we will have more freedom, and more freedom leads to more prosperity. And that still disgusts me because this is still a pain and pleasure calculus. And that's why I wanted to develop an idea, a system where the thing that we should value most is freedom, not pleasure and pain. But that's another conversation.
Yeah, I think that if you want a more of a in-depth argument for the non-aggression principle being true, I urge you to listen to Zulu's course on the matter, and the mixed law and also argumentation ethics. I think he makes a pretty good point. And because contradictions are false. I'm sure me and you can agree with that. So if
Correct.
there's only three options and the other two options are false, its negation must be true, you know? And that's sort of where we get our objective morality from. It isn't that um, we look at the non-aggression principle and we be like, oh, it's true. What we're doing is we're proving the other principles incorrect. And then because the last one is without contradiction, it must be true. And he goes super deep into it in his course. I couldn't. I've read into it, but I couldn't explain it as well as he can in his course.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah. It's a dicey conversation and definitely one that requires like a full fleshing out of how to understand it. But yeah,
If you
that's
want,
currently my problem.
you can actually talk to Liquid Zulu. I know you can hit him up in his Discord or his website, and there's ways that you can actually have a conversation with him. He's a nice guy.
I actually
He's taught me a
messaged him
lot.
on Discord and X. I'm still waiting for a response. I don't know if he's AFK right now, like what's
Hmm.
happening, but yeah, I'm trying to set something up with him currently.
Yeah, I'm sure he'll get back to you on it. Just I know there's I'm pretty sure there's a way on his website where you can hit him up. But I'm not
Dude,
sure.
I looked all over his website. First of all, it's slow as frick, but also I looked over it. I couldn't find any like messages or emails or anything like that.
Maybe I'll hit him up
But
on your behalf.
oh, I
I'll
would
get you
appreciate
set
that,
up.
bro. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem.
Um,
Anything
yeah,
else?
I don't know how much time you have left, but I'd like to ask you a few more questions if it doesn't
Yes.
take too much of your time.
No, please.
Um, okay. So I'll ask you not as difficult questions as I asked before, but we sort of already talked about your justification for the NAP. But um, so I'll say that we can agree on the legal system. We can agree that a legal system must be objective, and the only legal system that is completely consistent is a justice system that incorporates the NAP. We can agree on that. I'm still not convinced that we've closed the Izot gap and created an ethic from deductive logic. But that's a different conversation. So I'll just ask you, what is your justification for private property?
Well, the justification for private property is that every system, no matter what, believes in private property, regardless of what system you're under, whether you're a socialist, whether you're a communist, whether you're a right winger, left winger, this side, that side. Every system assigns property rights. It's just how you assign property rights that distinguishes libertarianism and other groups. So, for instance, when it comes to like socialism, they assign property rights to the bourgeoisie, right? When there's a dispute. So when there's like for like racists, they'll be like, oh, the property right would belong to the white person as opposed to the black person. For this group, they would say this group, or for like Christian people, they would say the Christians over this group. So the difference between like libertarianism and like all these other ideologies is we assign the property right to the individual who doesn't violate the consent of others in order to get that private property, because our ideology is mainly based on consent and not violating other people's consent. So that's why we believe very strongly in homesteading and self ownership and voluntary transaction. So if I could explain self ownership, essentially the reason why you own yourself is because you are yourself, you are your body, and you are in control of your body. So because of that, um, when you use your body, you're also saying that you ought have the right to control this scarce resource. And by using your body, you're not violating the consent of another person. And for another person to use your body, they would necessarily have to violate your consent. So it must be that the person that is inhabiting the body is the person with the best link to that scarce resource. And we assign property rights to the individual who has the best link to that scarce resource and hasn't violated other people's consent in order to get it. So that's, and then it goes to like voluntary transaction. You have to voluntarily transact something with somebody. That's another consensual transaction. Then there is homesteading. A lot of people would say property is theft, but the issue with that is that it's a stolen concept, because you're saying that uh, if something is theft, somebody must own that thing. but if nobody owns it, then who are you stealing from? You know what I'm saying? If property is theft, who are you stealing from? So it's a stolen concept. You have to believe in ownership in order to believe that somebody is able to steal it. So that doesn't make sense. And also, if you by using a scarce resource without another person's position, you are stealing from stealing from other people. Well, then nobody could ever use any scarce resource ever. Like if you're stranded on an island, should you not touch that coconut in order to drink the coconut because you're gonna die? You shouldn't touch because you're violating the consent of some other person that could have possibly used that. And you could make that same justification for that other person. So the only way to have a logical property ethic is to believe in homesteading, because otherwise, then nobody would ever be able to use anything. So that's the reason why I believe in the libertarian principle, the libertarian view of private property rights. Because, like I said earlier, everybody believes in property rights to some extent.
Agreed. I think, yeah, you're making a good point where you're basically essentially going back to the legal system and saying that if we had collective ownership, that would be an inconsistency in the law and it would lead to conflict. And I would agree with you. I try to get more on the consequentialist case where I try to put myself in their world and tell them, okay, we've got two options. We can have private property or we can't have private property. And there's no in between. There's no freaking in between. Although I've noticed a trend where leftists will always, and statists will always argue for an in between answer. They will always do this because they want the best of both worlds. And this is inherently arbitrary, as you already know. As the law of the excluded middle says, you cannot have something in the middle between yes and no. You can't do it.
Yes.
It doesn't exist.
Yes.
And the way I try to justify it is by saying, okay, we can have private property or we can have public property. And there's no in between. And there's a very big problem with public property. Who does public property apply to? Does it apply to everybody in a certain area? No, if you say public property applies to everyone, it applies to everyone in the entire world. So this means that every single person who has ever lived, does live, and will ever live communally owns the earth and every single resource in the universe. And they will try to draw arbitrary lines, but those lines are arbitrary because you can't have something in between yes and no. And so the argument that I would say is something called reductio ad absurdum, where if we had collective property, what would happen is that we would have to vote globally on every single thing that happens, and we would all die from starvation.
Absolutely.
But the problem is
yeah.
they won't ever agree to that because they'll just make some arbitrary line, which is arbitrary. It's on their whims.
In fact, I have an excellent little cartoon here. I sent it to you in the messages, but not cartoon, but picture, that explains why collective ownership does not work. And so I'm gonna just show it to you real quick. Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
So yeah, so you see the picture?
Yeah, I have it up.
Yeah, so scarcity exists. Scarcity implies the possibility of conflict. Conflict describes a situation in which two individuals have mutually exclusive actions with a scarce good. Ownership refers to the right to control a scarce good. Joint ownership describes the situation in which two people have the right to control a scarce good. If two people have this right, then they are unable to resolve disputes. The ability to resolve disputes is the sole purpose of ownership. So therefore, the concept of joint ownership in itself is invalid on the basis of being self-contradictory. Question 1. Person A and person B find themselves on a deserted island and each agree to jointly own a particular stick. Person A wants to use it to transform it into a spear, and person B doesn't want it to be transformed into a spear. Each of these desires exclude one another. So who has the right to exclude the other person's outcome? So there's 3 possible answers in which somebody can choose. Person A is justified in turning the spear into a stick, which implies that he is the owner, since his use excludes person B. Person B is justified in preventing person A into transforming the spear into a stick, which implies that he is the owner, since his use excludes the other person's. If neither person A or B are justified, then neither are the owner. The conclusion is that collective ownership is a contradiction, because if both owned the scarce resource, neither would find themselves in a situation where being excluded from using it would be considered to be justified. So the issue again with collective ownership is, to explain it briefly, is that if two people own a particular stick, and the reason why we have property rights is to settle disputes. So for instance, if me and you have a dispute over a scarce resource, the person who you believe ought to win, you're basically saying this person has the ownership over the scarce resource. This person has the right to exclude the other person from that scarce resource. But if they both collectively own the scarce resource, then neither of them could possibly exclude the other, because then the other person would no longer be the owner. They're both the owner and not the owner. It's A and not A, which is a contradiction. So that's the issue with collective ownership. It doesn't settle disputes. So property rights must be individual, because when there is a dispute over that scarce resource and being used as exclusive actions, only one person can win out in that dispute. And libertarians believe that the person who is the first comer or got it through voluntary transaction is the property right owner. So in that dispute, it would go to that person.
Yep, very true. And I would describe it differently. What I can tell from you in your approach to this is that you are always talking within a legal perspective. And I think most people probably don't understand that. They think that when you say contradiction, they're saying, what are you talking about? What contradiction? You're talking about a contradiction within the legal system. And the point of law is to solve conflict, as Zulu always says, as you've said in the past.
Settle disputes.
Exactly. And so I would just word it differently. The way you say it's fine. I would personally word it differently, saying that conflict exists in the world. And the thing is, if we don't abide by this example that you just showed, we will have conflict. And conflict is bad for everyone. And this is the way the consequentialists would see it, and the whimsy dimsy flimsy leftists would see it. Is they would see it as they need to understand that conflict is a bad thing, and we all have to agree that conflict is a bad thing. And if we don't negotiate, we have to war. We have to go to war. And war is bad for everyone. So this is the reason why we can't have contradictions in a legal system. Because if we do, then we will naturally just lead to conflict. That is conflict inducing.
Absolutely. If you don't know the law, if the laws are so complicated, you could break the law and not even know it. You've initiated a conflict and you don't even know it. That's why our laws need to be simple. They need to be easy to understand, and they need to be universalizable. Because if it doesn't apply to everyone, well, then you have different groups of people that have different rules, even though we're all capable of reasoning. So to me, that's just a contradictory legal system. We must have it to be universalizable. It must be universalizable. It must apply to all people.
It's absolutely true.
Mm-hmm.
So funny, I actually ran out of questions, but
No problem. No
that
problem.
was
That was good. That was fun. You know what, man? I like you, man. And I think that we had a good conversation, man. I hope it would be cool if maybe we debated together. That would be pretty cool.
yeah. I heard you send me. I saw that message, and I was curious what exactly you mean by. So I've seen dual debates before. I've never participated. I've only debated like literally twice since I've created this channel. So that doesn't mean I'm not a good debater. It just means I don't have experience in public debates. But I'm definitely interested in doing debates with you. What would that look like?
Absolutely. You seem to me to be very well spoken. You seem to know your shit. You've explained to me some things that I wasn't aware of before of my own ideology today. So which I appreciate about that. Generally, what I do is I just look for people who are willing to debate on a specific topic, and then we usually have two opening statements, and then it's just like a back and forth where we debate this topic. So it could be about anything. So what I do is I just go out and try to find people who are willing to debate me, and then I set it up. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I love to debate people.
I noticed that. Yeah, so I think it's a good idea. I think we both have specific skills in different things. I think you seem to be very knowledgeable on the legal system when it comes to NAP, and obviously I understand more of the philosophical sides of it because I studied philosophy. So I think we could be a good combo in debates.
Dynamic duo.
Dynamic duo indeed.
All right, man.
But yeah, no. Also, I'm not very good at using Discord either. Obviously, because I'm new to all this. But I'm not very good at finding people to debate either. I want to have conversations with people.
Mhm.
But I can't really find anybody. I don't know how to find people. Sometimes I'll like jump into servers and stuff, but the people are just talking about dumb bullshit that I can never like start talking. But yeah, like if you have connections of people to discuss things with, I would be more than happy, more
Yeah,
willing to debate about those
yeah. I'll
certain
see what I can
things.
do. I'll see what I can do. Maybe we could get something set up. Anything else you want to say? Any parting words?
You know, keep killing them, King Sithis. Keep killing them with that, with your Dark Brotherhood clan of. You're a cult leader, so
Yeah, bro.
that's pretty
I
cool.
appreciate you. And
Yeah,
you know what, bro? You're doing great work, and you know the non-aggression principle is true, and
so
anarcho-capitalism
true.
is the best. And I'm very glad that you are as well an anarcho-capitalist. So I hope that I hope you have you know, you keep on fighting the good fight, man. And it was a really good conversation. So I hope to see you next time, man.